Welcome to the Civil Rights Summit, as we welcome the President and First Lady of the United States. We shall overcome. That song became an anthem for the civil rights movement. And for those who fought against racial injustice, those words have special meaning. On March 7, 1965, John Lewis helped to lead a protest march for voting rights from Selma, Alabama, to the state's capital, Montgomery. The march was brutally thwarted by Alabama state troopers in a day of infamy that became known as Bloody Sunday. President Lyndon Johnson was never one to let a good crisis go to waste. A week later, he used Bloody Sunday to show the need to pass the Voting Rights Act that he had proposed, but that had stalled in the halls of Congress. In a plea before Congress and the nation, he said, "It is all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, and we shall overcome." John Lewis watched that speech in Selma with his mentor, Dr. Martin Luther King, at his side. As President Johnson said those words, Mr. Lewis saw Dr. King cry for the first time. "We will march from Selma to Montgomery," Dr. King said with tears in his eyes. "The Voting Rights Act will pass." Dr. King and Mr. Lewis made their march from Selma to Montgomery, and President Johnson passed the Voting Rights Act. If we have overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, it is largely because of the courage and fortitude of those like Lyndon Johnson, Martin Luther King, and John Lewis. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to this stage Congressman John Lewis.
Thank you, Mark, and the staff of the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library. My beloved friends, my sisters and brothers, I have the special honor to introduce the keynote speaker for this 50th anniversary celebration of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It is so fitting and so appropriate that President Barack Obama would join us today to honor the legacy of President Lyndon Johnson. Now, President Barack Obama was born into a dangerous and difficult time in American history, a time when people were arrested and taken to jail just for sitting beside each other on a bus. It was against the law for black and white people to ride in the same taxi cab or stay in the same hotel. People's homes were bombed, their lives were threatened for taking a simple drink from the same water fountain, for sharing the same table in a restaurant or at a lunch counter. There were signs everywhere that said white and colored, and they imposed an unholy order on the lives of the average American citizen. When President Johnson used his political power and the force of his will to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and later the Voting Rights of 1965, all of those signs came tumbling down. And you will not see those signs. Our children will not see those signs, except in a museum, in a book, or on a video. President Lyndon Johnson, this man from Texas, liberated not just a people, but an entire nation from the inhumanity of legalized segregation. Without the leadership of President Lyndon Johnson and involvement of hundreds and thousands and millions of people in the civil rights movement, there will be no President Jimmy Carter, no President Bill Clinton, no President Barack Obama. Lyndon Johnson, using his skill and his power, made it possible. And when people said nothing had changed, I said, come and walk in my shoes and I will show you change. When President Barack Obama walked through the doors of the White House, he ushered in a time of great hope, silent prayers, and deep aspiration. As a nation, we felt we may have finally realized the vision President Johnson had for all of us, to live the idea of freedom and eliminate injustice from our beloved country. We used the liberty we gained from Johnson's legacy to elect a man with the raw courage and tenacity to do all he could to make our society a better place and move us closer to the beloved community. I know this man, this president, Barack Obama. He sees the progress we've made as a nation, and that he understands there's much more work to do to redeem the soul of America. And that is why, as president, he has set his shoulders to the plow to bring about meaningful change in America by ending 2 wars and passing comprehensive health care reform. That is said. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, my dear friends, it is my great honor and pleasure to present our friend, our president, President Barack Obama, and the First Lady.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please have a seat. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please. What a singular honor it is for me to be here today. I want to thank, first and foremost, the Johnson family for giving us this opportunity and the graciousness with which Michelle and I have been received. We came down a little bit late because we were upstairs looking at some of the exhibits and some of the private offices that were used by President Johnson and Ms. Johnson. And Michelle was in particular interested of a recording in which Lady Bird is critiquing President Johnson's performance. And she said, come, you need to listen to this. And she pressed the button and nodded her head. Some things do not change, even 50 years later. To all the members of Congress, the warriors for justice, the elected officials, and community leaders who are here today, I want to thank you. 4 days into his sudden presidency, and the night before he would address a joint session of the Congress in which he once served. Lyndon Johnson sat around a table with his closest advisors, preparing his remarks to a shattered and grieving nation. He wanted to call on senators and representatives to pass a civil rights bill, the most sweeping since Reconstruction. And most of his staff counseled him against it. They said it was hopeless, that it would anger powerful Southern Democrats and committee chairmen, that it risked derailing the rest of his domestic agenda. And one particularly bold aide said he did not believe a president should spend his time and power on lost causes, however worthy they might be. To which it is said, President Johnson replied, "Well, what the hell's the presidency for?" What the hell's the presidency for? If not